Picture this for a second. You walk into a convenience store in Japan around 3 in the afternoon. The aisles are full of elementary school kids in bright yellow hats and tiny backpacks. Some of them are standing in front of the snack shelf carefully counting coins in their palms, trying to decide whether they should buy candy now or save money for something bigger later. Others walk around the store without buying anything at all. They look, compare prices, think about it, then quietly leave empty-handed. And the strange thing is, nobody feels bad for them. Nobody rushes over to hand them extra money. No parent appears to say, "It's okay, just get whatever you want." That small moment, standing there with an empty wallet, is actually considered part of the lesson. Now here's the part that surprises most people. The average Japanese adult saves only around 3% of their income. But Japanese children, on average, save nearly 40% of their allowance. Think about that for a second. An 8-year-old child is often showing more financial discipline than a grown adult with a full-time job. So how does that happen? It's not because Japanese children are naturally more obedient or magically better with money. It's because many of them grow up inside a system that teaches financial responsibility almost automatically, without lectures, punishments, or motivational speeches. In a lot of Western households, money becomes emotional. Parents use it as a reward for good grades, or take it away as punishment for bad behavior. Sometimes kids receive money randomly whenever they ask for it. Other times parents step in the moment a child runs out of cash. Japan tends to approach this differently. Children usually receive a fixed amount of allowance on the same day every week or every month. The amount doesn't suddenly increase because they behaved well, and it doesn't disappear because they made a mistake. It's predictable. Stable. Almost like a salary. That consistency matters more than people realize. The moment money stops being tied to emotional approval, children begin seeing it differently. It becomes something to manage rather than something controlled by adults. Parents often don't interfere with how it gets spent. If the child wastes all of it on candy in one afternoon, that's their choice. Nobody delivers a long lecture. Nobody says, "See? I told you not to buy that." The consequence teaches the lesson naturally. Because the next day, when their friends buy snacks after school, they have nothing. And that feeling, that tiny frustration of having spent everything too early, is incredibly powerful. Psychologists call this experiential learning. Human beings rarely learn deeply from advice alone. We learn from emotional experience. Japanese parents sometimes describe this as learning through emptiness. The temporary discomfort of having nothing forces the brain to plan ahead next time. What's fascinating is that science strongly supports this idea. A major study from the University of Cambridge found that many financial habits are already forming by around age 7. That's the same period when important parts of the brain related to planning and self-control begin rapidly developing. Another study from Bristol University tracked children who managed even very small budgets by themselves. Kids who regularly handled their own money were significantly more likely to maintain savings habits later in adulthood compared to children whose finances were constantly controlled by parents. And honestly, it makes sense. You can explain budgeting to a child 100 times, but the moment they spend their last dollar and suddenly can't buy something they really want 2 days later, the lesson becomes real. The brain remembers emotional pain far more clearly than abstract advice. There's also something deeper happening beneath the surface. This system isn't really about money. It's about decision-making under limitation. Modern life removes limits from almost everything. Adults can order food instantly, swipe a credit card without seeing physical cash disappear, buy things online at midnight, and split payments into tiny monthly installments. We've created a world where the consequences of spending often feel invisible. But children raised with structured allowances experience something different. They feel trade-offs directly. If they buy one thing, they may lose the opportunity to buy another. If they spend impulsively today, tomorrow becomes harder. That's not cruelty. That's reality. And strangely enough, children often become calmer because of it. When rules are consistent, kids stop negotiating endlessly. they already know the amount they have. They already know there won't be emergency rescue money later. So instead of fighting the system, they begin adapting to it. One Japanese behavioral economist explained it beautifully. He said Japanese parents don't really teach children about money. They let money teach them. That sentence changes everything. Because most financial education focuses on information. Budget spreadsheets. Saving tips. Investment advice. But behavior rarely changes through information alone. Behavior changes through repeated experience. That's why even very small habits can completely reshape the way a child thinks about resources. For example, some families divide allowance into separate jars, one for saving, one for spending, and one for sharing or giving. The child physically watches money move between categories. They begin understanding allocation long before they ever hear words like investing or budgeting. Some parents also introduce waiting periods before larger purchases. If a child wants something expensive, they wait 3 days before buying it. Not because the parents want to deny them happiness, but because impulse control is like a muscle. The pause itself becomes training. And interestingly, many children lose interest in the item after waiting. Which teaches another valuable lesson: sometimes the excitement of wanting something disappears faster than expected. There's also a subtle identity shift happening in all of this. A child who manages money independently begins seeing themselves differently. They stop feeling like someone who simply receives things from adults. They start feeling responsible for outcomes. That identity matters enormously later in life. Because financially responsible adults usually aren't people with the highest salaries. They're people who learned early that resources are limited, choices have consequences, and planning creates freedom. Japan understood this long before neuroscience studies confirmed it. They understood that responsibility can't be fully taught through lectures. It has to be experienced personally. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Children don't become financially strong because adults protect them from mistakes. They become financially strong because they're allowed to make small mistakes early, while the consequences are still safe enough to learn from. A lost allowance at age 8 is frustrating. A lifetime of financial impulsiveness at age 40 is devastating. That's why these tiny moments inside convenience stores matter more than they seem. A child standing quietly in front of a snack shelf, deciding whether to spend now or wait until later, may actually be practicing one of the most important adult skills they will ever develop.